Why?
Because we don't know what we like, nor what we need. That is the truth. I remember when I started studying philosophy, when I was very young, just 24 years old, my teacher asked me to try to find at night, before going to sleep, a moment in your day when you were truly happy. Friends, that was quite an experience. I would go through my entire day in my memory.
I'll do that. I don't think I ever have. What is it like to think about the moment of your day before going to sleep?
At what moment in your day were you truly happy? I was a young woman. I used to go to happy hours, going here and there. It was at that moment that I realized I was doing it just out of convention. I never drank. I didn't like being there. It made no sense at all. I did it just to check the box of youthful fun that I was supposed to have, which was expected at my age. When I tried to recall the moment when I was happiest, I remembered the time I was planting a rose bush in the garden. That was absolutely wonderful. A state of peace, of spirit, of connection with nature. That was a moment of true happiness. I stood in front of the mirror and said, "What kind of human being am I, who doesn't even know when I'm happy and when I'm not?" What a complete lack of self-knowledge, honestly. That was a very important experience for me, to begin practicing philosophy, to find myself amidst everything that I am. Which is the definition of the word intelligence, interleger, to choose among. Among all the things we absorb all the time. Who am I? Amidst all of this, where am I truly fulfilled? Where am I fulfilled?
And then, when you became aware of this, were you able to reprogram your daily life to prioritize the things that make you happy? Or is it also not very healthy to guide yourself only by what makes you happy? You do also have to do things that don't make you so happy, maybe even make you sad. How do you find that balance?
It's important for us to understand, as I mentioned to you, that our center is deeply connected to the idea of goodness. And many times, our character formation is not as adequate as it could be. We don't like to do things that are good for us, for humanity, or for others.
Don't we?
No, we don't like it. We weren't educated for that. Many times, you enjoy doing things that are tremendously destructive for yourself. That's character formation. Character means enjoying what helps you grow as a human being and rejecting what drags you down to an animalistic state, to a state of inertia. We were not very well formed in terms of character. So, there are a lot of things we like to do that are terrible for us, that harm us.
I'm talking about addictions, for example.
Addictions, negative psychological habits, being critical, getting involved in topics that lower our consciousness too much, sometimes making ourselves vulgar. There are many constant bad habits that we use, and when you notice, your consciousness is at its lowest. So, it's not very reliable to just do what you like, thinking that will make you happy, because, in reality, what we like doesn't guarantee much.
Spending the whole day planting roses.
In other words, planting roses is actually healthy, but you can't spend the entire day doing it. Sometimes, we spend the whole day doing things we like that are not healthy at all, criticizing, looking for the worst in others, and things like that. But ideally, you should strive to do what you ought to do and learn to enjoy what you ought to do. I ought to be just, I ought to be fraternal, I ought to be sensitive to the needs of others. Let me learn to appreciate that, because that is what truly does me good. That is what it means to reform your character. Learning to enjoy what benefits you and to reject what is negative. Because all of us need a good reform of character.
This takes time.
This is a lifelong journey.
It lasts a lifetime.
Lasts lifetime.
It is a process.
It is a subtle readjustment of our character, like tuning an instrument. That is exactly what life is. This is Stoic. This comes from Seneca.
Professor, you mentioned that we often do not want to do what is ideal, what is truly good for us. I think in the Bible, it says, "The good that I should do, I do not do. The evil." And the evil, I end up doing it. I'm not sure if it's Paul. See if you can find that passage, Tutti. Why is it that, even knowing sometimes that we are harming ourselves, we still persist? I say this, like when you have one of those relationship talks, right? A conversation between partners. You think ahead and say, I'll say this. I'll get worked up. And then, in the middle of the conversation, you realize everything I planned to do, I'm doing, and you feel bad because you said it. And then you have to apologize because that wasn't what you should have done. How do you control your mind and manage that constant impulse? I have a lot of trouble. I feel like I need to express what I'm feeling so that people are clear about what I'm feeling. And usually people get startled sometimes because they're not used to sincerity or to someone being so direct. I liked it. I didn't like it. Let's try to do this. Let's try to do that. And what about society? It seems like it always puts you in a place of, don't say anything, just let things go on. What is the balance between me? Control. Do I try to control my own life and let people know what is good for me and what harms me? Or simply, is it better for me not to let myself be affected by the outside and just move on? I'm not sure if I was clear, because it was a very long question.
No, there is an art that we hardly even know exists anymore, because no one practices it, which is diplomacy. Which is to say what needs to be said in a way that does not hurt the other person. And this is an art that, when you practice it, you can become very skilled at it. In other words, knowing how to present things in such a way that the truth that needs to be spoken is indeed spoken, because not everything needs to be said, but the truth that must be said is expressed without being offensive, without causing hurt, without striking at the other person's vulnerable points. There is always a way to do it. It's a matter of mentally experimenting with what I would like to hear if I were in the other person's place. How could I say this without causing wounds? In other words, diplomacy is the art of bringing truth into the world with the least harm to everyone involved. We hardly ever practice this. And another thing is the matter of self-control, which we also rarely practice. Then, in a moment of crisis, we want to have it, but we don't. It's like an army. When it goes to war, it's effective because it has practiced during times of peace. In the small things, we'll see ourselves practicing self-control. But we don't. We let our temperament run completely free, and we have no control over it. So, from the moment you get irritated in traffic, to the moment you get annoyed because the elevator is taking too long, to the moment you get upset because the food order was wrong, or any of these little things, like when you wanted to get out of the elevator, but someone wanted to get in and wouldn't let you out. In short, if we start to control these things in such a way, we realize that, in the end, it all comes down to a strong sense of self-importance. I have to have priority in everything. Everything. No one can stand in front of me. I can't wait for the elevator. I can't accept someone else's mistake. But if I start to control this, if I am able to take the reins of my temperament and train it like a good rider. Train your horse. Make it obey you and not trample over you. Start training with the small things. With the big things, you'll be able to handle them, but with the small ones, we tend to let everything run completely wild. And then, there's not much you can do. It becomes very complicated. I find it interesting how sometimes people not only do this, but are even proud of it.
True.
Have you ever heard people say, "Don't mess with me, or you'll turn into a beast"?
Yeah, that's ugly. You have a strong personality.
Yes. If you mess with me, I turn into a beast. Turning into a beast is very easy, my friend. Try becoming truly human. That's what I want to see. In other words, take the reins of your life and hold on tight. Make the horse walk in the direction you choose, not just however it wants, kicking out in every direction. But this is a practice you develop in the small things, becoming more and more aware of what is happening. Bringing me to this point, because I feel so important that I can't have a little patience. To admit someone else's mistake, to wait a little. This is what, in medieval alchemy, was called the work in black. The work in black, Negredo. Negredo, well, just to explain a bit first about medieval alchemy. We usually think of it as those, let's say, precursors of chemistry who were actually trying to turn lead into gold. As Carl Jung so aptly puts it, in truth, the great aim of the alchemists was to transform the lead of ignorance into the gold of wisdom.
It was metaphorical.
Yes, and in fact, the stages they describe are stages of self-mastery. The work in black is when you plunge your consciousness into the depths, into your own inner underground, and discover the multitude of creatures that dwell there. Your envy, your competitiveness, your uncontrolled anger. Everything that is there. Then, once you recognize it, that is already a good beginning, acknowledging everything that lives within us, because it is a necessary process for transformation. You begin the work in black, which is to tame all these creatures. They do not cease to exist, but now they obey you. So, if you are terribly stubborn, for example, the energy of stubbornness becomes determination. If you are a passionate person who is always swinging from one passion to another, the energy of passion becomes enthusiasm. You can accomplish so much with these energies, but only when they are tamed and respond to your command. That is the work in white. Ultimately, we need to do a bit of this ourselves. We need to look within, identify the untamed little creatures inside us, and train them, domesticate them, make them obey our command. We want to eliminate these energies, but well master them. And this happens in daily life, in the smallest of things. Don't try to start in the middle of a war, because it won't work. If I try to start training in the midst of battle, I am already defeated.
I found the text here. It's Romans 7. Verses 19 to 24, the letter to the Romans. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. But if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but the sin living in me that does it. So, I know that this is what happens to me. When I want to do what is good, I end up only doing what is wrong.
In other words, the sin that lives in me, your bad habits, your distorted preferences, your inertia to change, all of these things.
The neural connections that always follow the same path.
Exactly, it is a habit of inertia that you must break, and begin to give different responses to things, the same stimuli, but with different responses. This is a task, a work of self-construction that, as mentioned, should last throughout our lives. I want to be a human who, in a critical situation, can control myself. It also controls non-critical situations. First,
In the small things.
in the small things of daily life.
I know this is a very complicated topic, since we are talking about good and evil, which depends on culture, it depends on the historical period. But how do we find it? Do we have this good and evil within ourselves? This creature you mentioned, many people talk about having two wolves that exist within us. One is good and the other is bad, and it depends on which one you feed. How do we view good and evil, setting aside the idea of religion or faith?
Well, for philosophy, this somewhat Manichaean view doesn't make much sense. What actually exists is, there are values, virtues, and the absence of values and virtues.
But in philosophy, there isn't the idea of an external evil, of an entity, or something that drags you down.
Philosophy is a very broad term. If you take Christian philosophy, for example, then yes, it does exist. But I'm referring to the philosophical idea that we can trace back to the origins, to Greece, the cradle of philosophy. Defect comes from defecto, meaning a void, an emptiness. Shadow is the absence of light. In other words, it is simply a space that I have not yet filled with a degree of consciousness, with a degree of virtue, with a degree of value, with a degree of wisdom. In other words, these are the spaces I have not yet filled, they are the voids. Ignorance is a vacuum, it is a shadow that we must fill with light. As we grow, mature, and gain greater mastery over ourselves, as we develop the ability to better handle circumstances and to act more positively in the world, we begin to banish these shadows. Plato once said that you are always a mixture of both, of light and shadow. The point is to gradually diminish that shadow and increase the amount of light that exists within each of us.
And to increase that light, is it self-knowledge?
To increase that light, first and foremost, you have to appreciate it and desire it.
and then it is.
Of course.
Because it is powerful, because it gives you strength. Why are people drawn to evil or to the shadow?
In truth, I believe it is very much a matter of a way of life that you have assimilated and do not wish to change. In other words, it is comfortable there, it brings results, it provides answers that satisfy you. So, I do not want to change. I do things in a certain way, and unless there is a force.
If there isn't I will keep doing the same thing, even if it harms me.
Sometimes, it takes a state of very intense pain in a person's life for them to reconsider their ways, their modus operandi, the way they act throughout life. Because otherwise, these are chains, the person remains shackled there and cannot break free. They never break out of that way of doing things. Their whole life, they respond to life and its circumstances in the same way. Inertia is a very powerful force, and the force of habit is also very strong. You need to consciously start breaking these links. When a certain stimulus occurs, I will not react this way, I will react that way, and I will keep imposing this new reaction. With awareness present, even in small circumstances. Until you create a new path, a new syllogism, another route through which your responses can flow.